The most powerful blood sugar tool in your pharmacy might not be a pharmaceutical at all. I know exactly how that sounds. So let me back up for a second, because if you are someone who checks your blood sugar first thing in the morning, or you have watched that number creep up year after year, or you already take medication for this and just wish someone would give you the full picture instead of a rushed 7-minute appointment, this next few minutes is for you. Here's the promise. By the end of this video, you are going to know the name of a single route that researchers took and placed directly next to one of the most prescribed diabetes medications in the world in an actual clinical trial with real patients, real blood work, and real numbers. And when they compared the results side by side, the two looked remarkably alike. Same drop in fasting blood sugar. Same improvement in the marker doctors use to track long-term diabetes control. One of them came from a laboratory. The other one came from a root that has been growing on this planet for centuries. Here's everything I'm going to cover. Exactly what this root is and where it comes from. The actual study, published and peer-reviewed, sitting quietly in a medical journal since 2008 that most people have never heard of, and exactly how to take it. The dose, the timing, and the small mistakes that cause most people to give up on it before it ever has a chance to work. Out of every natural compound I have researched in over 30 years of clinical practice, this is one of a very small handful where the science actually holds up when you put it next to a prescription drug. So if that sounds like something worth a few minutes of your time, let's get into it. Here's what most people believe about managing blood sugar. There are 2 lanes. Lane 1 is diet and exercise. Lane 2, if lane 1 isn't enough, is a prescription. That's the whole map most of us were ever given, usually in a rushed conversation at a checkup, maybe with a pamphlet stapled to it. And to be fair, that map isn't wrong. Metformin has been around for over 60 years. It's inexpensive, it's been studied in millions of patients, and for a huge number of people, it genuinely works. I want to be very clear about that before I say anything else, because this video is not about talking anyone out of medication their doctor prescribed them. What I want to talk about is a third lane, one that almost never makes it into that 7-minute appointment, mostly because most doctors simply don't have the time. And frankly, most of them were never trained to look at plant compounds the same way they look at pharmaceuticals. It falls into a strange gap. Too clinical for wellness culture, too unfamiliar for a standard medical visit. That gap is where this root sits. It's called berberine, and it comes from the root of a plant called Berberis vulgaris, sometimes known as barberry. People have been using parts of this plant for centuries, long before anyone understood why it worked. It shows up in traditional Chinese medicine and in Ayurvedic medicine, mostly for digestive issues. Here's the part that changed everything. At some point, researchers noticed something happening in the blood work of people taking it. Their fasting glucose was dropping. Their long-term blood sugar marker was improving. So a group of scientists did what scientists do. They decided to test it properly in a real clinical trial against an actual prescription drug to see if what they were seeing held up under controlled conditions. That study exists. It's published. It's been sitting in a peer-reviewed medical journal since 2008, and it's just never made it into the mainstream conversation about diabetes. So here's the real question. What exactly is happening inside your body when you take this root, and why would it produce results anywhere close to a drug that took decades of pharmaceutical research to develop? That's exactly what I want to walk you through next. So what is actually going on inside your body when you take berberine? It comes down to something called AMPK. Now, that sounds like a term straight out of a biochemistry textbook. So let's make it simple. Think of AMPK as the main circuit breaker for your entire metabolism. When it flips on, your body shifts into a mode where it burns fuel more efficiently and stops hoarding sugar in your bloodstream. Berberine flips that switch. So does metformin? Actually, just through a slightly different path to get there. 2 different keys. Same lock. Here's why that matters for your blood sugar specifically. A big part of the problem for most people with elevated blood sugar comes from something most people never think about. Their liver is dumping extra glucose into their blood, even when they don't need it, especially overnight in between meals. Your liver is supposed to release sugar carefully, like a faucet, only when your body actually needs fuel. When that faucet gets stuck partway open, your blood sugar stays elevated basically around the clock, no matter how careful you are with food. When AMPK gets activated, that faucet starts closing back down to where it should be. Less unnecessary glucose gets released, your baseline blood sugar starts to come down, not just after meals, but throughout the day. I'll be honest, this pathway took me a couple of reds to really get comfortable with, and my eyes glazed over the first time too. It's dense material. But here's the piece I want you to actually walk away with. Berberine taps into the exact same switch your body already uses to regulate sugar, the same switch a 60-year-old prescription drug was designed to flip. That's the mechanism in plain terms. One switch, 2 different ways of reaching it. And once you understand that, the obvious next step is knowing exactly how to use it yourself in the right amount, at the right time. So let's get into that right now, before we even get to the study. So here's exactly what to do with this information. I'm going to keep it simple and specific. because vague advice rarely helps anyone. Standard dose used in most of the research is 500 milligrams, taken 2 to 3 times a day. That's the range that shows up again and again in clinical studies, so it's a reasonable place to start. Timing matters here. Take it with meals, ideally your main meals of the day. Berberine has a fairly short window of activity in your system, so spreading it out across the day alongside food keeps it working when your blood sugar actually needs the help, right when you're digesting a meal and glucose is entering your bloodstream. Look for a standardized extract when you're choosing a product. That phrase on the label matters more than the price tag. Quality and concentration vary a lot between brands, and a poorly made version simply won't give you the results shown in the research. One more thing before you start. If you're already taking metformin or any other medication, talk to your doctor first. This is genuinely important information for your doctor to have, because we'll get into exactly why later in this video. For now, just know that combining things without your doctor's knowledge is never the move, no matter how promising something looks on a screen. Give it 30 days. That's roughly how long it takes to see a meaningful shift in your fasting numbers if you're checking them regularly. Take it consistently, with meals, at that dose, and watch what your own blood sugar readings tell you. That's the practical side. Now here's the study I mentioned earlier, the one where researchers took this exact route and placed it side by side against a real prescription drug in real patients and measured exactly what happened. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, that all sounds reasonable, but is there actual proof? Or is this just a good theory dressed up nicely? Fair question. Let's look at the real study. In 2008, researchers published a trial in the medical journal Metabolism. They took 36 adults who had just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and split them into 2 groups. One group took berberine, 500 milligrams, 3 times a day. The other group took metformin at the exact same dose and schedule, same amount, same frequency, for 3 months. Then they measured the 2 most important numbers doctors use to track diabetes. The first is fasting blood sugar, the number you'd get from a blood draw first thing in the morning before eating anything. In the berberine group, that number dropped from around 191 to about 124. That's a real, meaningful drop. The second number is A1C, which reflects your average blood sugar over roughly the past 3 months. It's the number that really tells your doctor whether your diabetes is under control or not. In the berberine group, A1C dropped from 9.5% down to 7.5%. To put that in perspective, that 2-point drop is roughly the difference between diabetes that's considered poorly controlled and diabetes that's considered well managed by standard medical guidelines. And here's the detail that made researchers sit up. When they compared those numbers to the metformin group, the results were remarkably close. Similar drop in fasting blood sugar. Similar drop in A1C. Even blood sugar after meals came down by a similar amount in both groups. This is a well-documented trial. It's sitting in a peer-reviewed journal, it's been cited by researchers around the world since, and later studies involving thousands of patients combined have continued to confirm the same basic finding. A root, taken at a simple, standardized dose, produced blood sugar results that lined up closely with an established prescription medication. That's exactly what the data shows. Real numbers from real patients in a peer-reviewed trial. That same 2008 study actually had a second part to it, and I think it might be even more relevant to a lot of people watching this. Researchers took a different group of 48 patients, people whose type 2 diabetes was already poorly controlled, even with the medication they were already taking. So the question here was different. What happens when you add berberine on top of a treatment someone is already using? They added berberine to these patients' existing treatment for 3 months. A 1C dropped from 8.1% to 7.3%. Fasting insulin, the hormone your pancreas pumps out to manage blood sugar, dropped by 28%. And a marker doctors use to measure how resistant your body has become to insulin improved by nearly 45%. Think about what that means. These were people whose numbers weren't moving anymore, even under medical care. Adding one root to the picture got things moving again. Now here's the number I actually want you to remember out of this entire video, because more recent research has taken this even further. A 2025 study looked at combining berberine directly with metformin rather than choosing one or the other. Patients on that combination reached an effective control rate of 96%. Patients on metformin by itself reached 82%. That's a 14-point gap in favor of the combination in patients taking a prescription medication that already works well on its own. So this is a story about a root that appears to make an already effective treatment work even better. And it's also a story about a root that, entirely on its own, produces results close enough to a prescription drug that researchers felt it was worth publishing twice, 17 years apart. That's the evidence. 2 studies, real patients, real lab work, both pointing in the same direction. Berberine doesn't have to work alone. There are a couple of pairings worth knowing about. and they're both simple. The first is milk thistle. Berberine gets processed through your liver, and taking milk thistle alongside it supports that process, keeping your liver comfortable with the workload rather than straining under it. Many quality supplement formulas already combine the two for exactly this reason. You don't need a separate product necessarily, just something worth checking for on the label. The second is chromium. This is a mineral your body uses to help insulin do its job properly, almost like it improves the grip insulin has on your cells. Paired with berberine, the two appear to support blood sugar from two different angles at once, one lowering the sugar itself, the other helping your cells respond to it better. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know two other ingredients that work on this exact same system. Cinnamon, which I covered in detail in another video, has its own effect on insulin sensitivity, and black pepper extract, specifically the compound called piperine, actually helps your body absorb compounds like this more efficiently in general. If you stack all of these together, you're essentially hitting blood sugar regulation from several directions at once, rather than relying on a single mechanism to do all the work. I want to be clear about something here though. None of this means more is automatically better. Stacking supplements without paying attention to dose is how people end up with stomach discomfort, or in some cases, blood sugar that drops lower than they intended. If you want to combine berberine with any of these, start with berberine alone first. Let your body adjust for a couple of weeks, and add one thing at a time after that. That way, if something doesn't sit well with you, you'll actually know which ingredient caused it. Simple, layered, and built up gradually over time. Let's talk about what actually happens inside your body once you swallow that capsule, because it's a pretty interesting journey, and it helps to understand why this takes a little patience. In the first 20 to 30 minutes, berberine is making its way through your stomach and into your small intestine, where it starts getting absorbed into your bloodstream. It's a slow, steady absorption, nothing dramatic happening yet that you'd feel. By the 1 to 2 hour mark, it's circulating through your blood and reaching your liver, which is really the main site where the action happens. This is when it starts flipping that AMPC switch we talked about earlier, and your liver begins easing off on dumping extra glucose into your bloodstream. If you took it with a meal, this timing lines up almost perfectly with when your blood sugar would normally spike from digesting food. So instead of that sharp rise you'd normally see an hour or two after eating, the climb tends to be gentler. Smaller peak, smoother landing. Here's the honest part though. On day 1, you won't feel a dramatic difference. The real changes are happening quietly, at the level of your liver and your cells, long before they show up anywhere you can actually notice. By around day 5 to 7, if you're checking your fasting glucose each morning, some people start to see the number ease down slightly. Small movement, nothing huge yet. The bigger shift tends to show up around the 2 to 3 week mark. This is when insulin sensitivity has had enough time to actually improve, meaning your cells are responding better to the insulin your body produces. Fasting numbers tend to trend more consistently lower by this point, rather than just having the occasional good morning. By day 30, which is why I keep coming back to that number, most people who are going to see a meaningful shift in their fasting glucose and their overall control have something real to look at. A steady, consistent trend in the right direction, built quietly, day by day, starting from that very first dose. I want to walk you through the mistakes that cause most people to give up on this before it ever gets a real chance to work, because I see the same handful of errors over and over again. The first mistake is taking the entire daily dose all at once, usually in the morning, and calling it done for the day. Berberine moves through your system fairly quickly, so a single large dose gives you a short burst of activity and then a long stretch where there's basically nothing left working in your body. It's a little like filling up a swimming pool with a garden hose and shutting the water off after 10 minutes. You get some water in there, just nowhere close to what you were aiming for. Splitting the same total amount across 2 or 3 doses through the day keeps it actually working when your body needs it, which is largely at meal times. The second mistake is taking it on an empty stomach, far from any meal. This is when a lot of people report stomach discomfort, and it's also when you lose the timing advantage we talked about earlier, where berberine is most useful right around when your blood sugar would normally be rising from food. The third mistake, and honestly, the one I made myself the first time I tried this personally, is grabbing whatever bottle happens to be cheapest on the shelf without checking the label. Berberine supplements vary enormously in concentration and purity. Look for the word standardized on the label, and ideally a specific percentage of berberine content listed. If a label doesn't tell you that information at all, that's usually a sign the company doesn't want you asking. The fourth mistake is expecting results in 3 or 4 days and quitting when nothing dramatic happens. We just went through the actual timeline. Real, measurable change builds over 2 to 4 weeks. Checking daily and giving up after a few days is like judging a plant's growth after watering it once. Small errors, all of them fixable. Fix the timing, fix the dose split, fix the label you're reading, and give it the actual time it needs. That alone puts you ahead of most people who try this and quietly abandon it within the first week. Now, I promised earlier that I'd explain exactly why talking to your doctor before combining berberine with anything else actually matters, so let's get into that properly. Berberine gets broken down by your liver using some of the same processing pathways your liver uses to break down a number of common medications. When two substances rely on the same pathway, they can end up competing for it, and that competition can change how much of a medication actually stays active in your bloodstream. In practical terms, this matters most for three categories of medication. The first is cholesterol medications, particularly statins. The second is blood thinners, like warfarin. The third is certain antidepressants. If you're taking any of these, berberine can potentially raise or lower how much of that medication is active in your system, and that's something you want to know in advance rather than discover through trial and error on your own. This is exactly why I keep coming back to that one piece of advice. Talk to your doctor before you start. Your doctor can look at your specific medication list and tell you in about 30 seconds whether this is something to be cautious about or something that's perfectly fine to add. That conversation costs you nothing and could save you a real headache. There's also the blood sugar side of this to think about. If you're already taking metformin or another medication that lowers blood sugar and you add berberine on top without medical guidance, there's a real possibility your blood sugar drops lower than you want it to. Since we already saw that combination actually performs better than metformin alone, the smart move is having your doctor monitor your numbers while you adjust, especially in the first few weeks. One more group I want to mention specifically. If you're pregnant, nursing, or dealing with any liver condition, this is not something to start without a direct conversation with your doctor first, because those are situations where any new compound deserves a professional set of eyes on your specific case. This is about trying it the smart way, with the people who actually know your full medical picture involved in that decision. So let's bring this all together. You now know the name of a root that researchers placed directly next to a prescription medication in a real clinical trial and watched it produce remarkably similar results. You know the study, published in 2008, sitting quietly in a respected medical journal ever since. You know the exact dose, the timing, and the mistakes that cause most people to quit before they ever see a real result. And you know when to loop your doctor into the conversation, because that step genuinely matters. 30 days. That's all I'm asking you to give this. Take it consistently with your meals, at the dose we talked about, and let your own morning numbers tell you the story instead of taking my word for it. If this video gave you something useful, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this information reach other people who are sitting in exactly the position you were in 20 minutes ago, wondering if there's more to the picture than diet, exercise, and a prescription. If you're new here, subscribe, because I put out a new video like this every single week, and I want you to actually come back in 30 days and tell me how it went. Drop a comment with your before and after numbers if you're comfortable sharing them. I read every single one. And honestly, those comments are some of my favorite part of making these videos. I am Andrew Collins, and I will see you in the next video.